The wind howled through the jagged towers of the ancient castle, carrying with it a chill that seemed to seep into the bones of anyone who dared to approach. Shadows stretched long across the crumbling courtyard, swallowing the cobblestones in a blanket of darkness that seemed almost sentient, as if the castle itself were watching. The air smelled faintly of iron and decay, and somewhere deep within, a whispering sound drifted, too soft to decipher, yet impossible to ignore. A lone figure approached the massive oak doors, their steps echoing in the silence like a drumbeat warning of something long forgotten. As the traveler pushed open the heavy doors, the castle's interior unfolded like a labyrinth of twisted beauty and latent menace. Candlelight flickered across walls lined with tapestries so old that the figures they depicted had long since lost their faces, leaving only faint impressions of nobility and sorrow. Each room seemed alive, the shadows shifting unnaturally at the corners of vision. There was a sense that time itself bent differently here. Centuries of secrets and tragedies had seeped into the very stones, and the air felt thick with memories better left undisturbed. Then came the mirrors. At first, they appeared as ordinary reflections of polished glass, set into ornate frames carved with intricate patterns, dragons, thorned vines, and faces frozen in eternal screams. But as the traveler lifted their eyes, a creeping horror took hold. The reflection that should have greeted them was not there. Only the empty contours of a face-shaped void stared back. Panic rose like a tide, the rational mind scrambling to explain the impossibility. Poor lighting, dirty glass, exhaustion. Yet no explanation fit. Every mirror they encountered, in every hall and chamber, denied their image, swallowing it as if the person before it had never existed. Whispers of past occupants and visitors began to echo in the mind. Stories long passed down by the villagers in hushed tones. Noblemen disappearing from their own reflections, servants fleeing in terror, guests haunted by images that should not have been, suddenly made sense. The traveler felt the weight of centuries pressing down, a silent testimony to the castle's dark legacy. Mirrors here were more than mere instruments of vanity. They were thresholds, witnesses, perhaps even arbiters of some ancient, cruel law. Each empty reflection seemed to suggest that something had been taken, something essential that could never be returned. And then the faintest sound reached their ears, a scraping, almost imperceptible, like fingernails dragging across a wooden floor, coming from behind a mirror frame. The hairs on the back of their necks stood rigid as they realized the castle's silence was not absence. It was anticipation. Something moved in the spaces between reflection and reality. Something that had watched countless generations, feeding on curiosity, fear, and vanity alike. The traveler knew in that instant that the castle was alive in ways they could neither fully see nor comprehend. Outside, the moon broke free from the clouds, casting pale light over the castle. But inside, in every shadowed hallway and vaulted chamber, the darkness clung to the mirrors. Faces had vanished here for centuries, swallowed without trace. And now, in that very instant, another one had joined the tally. The castle had claimed yet another witness, leaving nothing behind but the empty stare of glass and the whisper of secrets that refused to die. Long before the castle became a stage for whispers and vanished faces, it stood as a monument to ambition, power, and fear. Its foundations were laid centuries ago, atop a rocky promontory overlooking a valley shrouded in mist for most of the year. The first stones were placed by a lord whose name survives only in fragmented manuscripts, a figure as enigmatic as the fortress he sought to build. Legend says he was driven by visions. Some called them divine, others whispered of darker influences. He commanded masons and artisans to raise walls so high that they seemed to scrape the heavens, towers so slender that the wind itself seemed to scream as it coiled around them, and halls so vast that no ordinary candle could illuminate their depths. The architecture was not merely ornamental. It was a calculated maze. Corridors twisted unpredictably, Staircases spiraled in impossible configurations, and secret doors hid chambers whose very existence seemed to defy logic. Some rooms were designed with false angles to confuse intruders, while others were hollowed out to create acoustic illusions. A soft footstep in one hall might echo in another, appearing to come from nowhere. Every stone, every beam, carried intention. The castle was built as a fortress, yes, but also as a vessel for secrecy and control. Its early lord was said to relish in this labyrinthine power, delighting in the fear it inspired and the whispers that inevitably followed. Even in those early days, the castle had a reputation. Travelers avoided the valley when the mists rose thick from the river below, claiming that shadows moved on their own and that strange lights danced in the highest towers at night. The villagers spoke of unexplained disappearances, livestock vanishing, servants fleeing, and sometimes noble guests who arrived but were never seen leaving. Written records from the period are fragmentary, but they hint at tensions between superstition and authority. One manuscript, nearly crumbling to dust, describes the Lord commissioning mirrors throughout the halls so that no deceit or malice could go unnoticed. What he perhaps could not predict was that those mirrors would, in time, betray him, and everyone who walked the castle's floors after. The early chronicles speak of a particular mirror, rumored to have been crafted in secrecy by an artisan whose knowledge of alchemy and folklore was whispered about in the villages beyond the mountains. It was no ordinary mirror. The glass was said to have been imbued with substances meant to reveal truth, or perhaps to conceal it. This first mirror became the subject of legend when the Lord's closest advisor reportedly vanished before it, leaving nothing but the faint imprint of his silhouette against the glass. Scholars debate whether it was an accident, a murder, or something far more sinister, but the tale endures, haunting every account of the castle's origins. Life within the fortress was a delicate balance of power, fear, and ceremony. Nobles and servants alike learned quickly that walls had ears and corridors had eyes. Secret alliances were formed, betrayals plotted, and whispers carried across vaulted ceilings, often unnoticed by the Lord himself. And yet, the castle demanded obedience, not only from its inhabitants but from reality itself. Some halls seemed to resist the intrusion of natural light, keeping rooms in perpetual twilight, even at noon. Others warped sound and perception, making simple navigation a disorienting ordeal. Visitors reported feelings of vertigo, unease, and inexplicable dread, a forewarning, perhaps, of the darker mysteries that would later define the castle. Despite its foreboding nature, the fortress was also a place of remarkable beauty. Intricate tapestries depicted the exploits of the Lord and his lineage. Carvings adorned the walls with mythical creatures frozen in stone, and the towers offered vistas of the surrounding lands that seemed almost otherworldly when bathed in the dawn light. But beneath this splendor lay a current of unease. Even servants, whose duty bound them to loyalty, spoke of hearing soft laughter echoing through empty halls, or of fleeting glimpses of figures that could not exist. It was a beauty intertwined with terror, a duality that would come to define the castle for centuries. By the late medieval period, the castle had already become more than a residence. It was a symbol, a warning, and a repository of secrets. Visitors came seeking favor or fortune, but many left with something more haunting, a lingering sense that the walls remembered them, that the mirrors were watching, that the very stones held the memory of the past. Scholars who later studied architectural plans noted that some corridors were designed to intentionally mislead, leading a person past a mirror multiple times, forcing them to confront not only their reflection, but their own sense of self. It was as if the castle was preparing the visitor, testing them, conditioning them for the events that would unfold in the centuries to come. By the end of the era, the castle had established its legend. Its foundations were not only physical, but psychological, embedding unease, fear, and fascination into anyone who crossed its threshold. What began as an ambitious project of a mysterious lord had evolved into something far more enduring, a fortress that was alive in memory, in story, and perhaps in some incomprehensible spectral sense. The origins of the castle were thus inseparable from its darkness, an inception rooted in ambition, secrecy, and a foreboding sense that this was no ordinary dwelling. It was a stage set for tragedy, for mystery, and for mirrors that would refuse to reflect faces. The first reports of the castle's strange mirrors came not from scholars or historians, but from those who lived in its shadow, the servants, the occasional visiting noble, and the wandering merchants who dared to spend the night within its walls. At first, the stories were dismissed as superstition or exaggeration. A mirror, after all, was merely a tool of reflection, a polished surface meant to return what stood before it. And yet, accounts persisted, growing more detailed and unnerving with each telling. It began subtly. A chambermaid, carrying a candle through a dimly lit hallway, noticed her face was absent in the looking glass she passed. Startled, she stepped closer, tilting her head, blinking, convinced it was a trick of the light. But no matter how she moved, how she held the flame to illuminate herself, the glass remained empty, as if it refused to acknowledge her very existence. When she recounted the incident to her fellow servants, some laughed nervously, while others fell silent, eyes darting to the shadows. It was the beginning of a realization. Something about these mirrors was different, something not entirely bound to the natural laws of the world. Over time, more incidents were recorded. Guests arriving for lavish feasts or secret councils would stare into mirrors and see nothing. Sometimes only parts of their bodies would vanish, the face, a hand, even the shadow of their presence, leaving behind a horrifying void. Letters and diaries from the era described the panic that followed. Noblemen doubting their own senses, servants fleeing in terror, and entire gatherings rendered mute by the inexplicable. One chronicler wrote of a young page who had been summoned by a lord and, upon entering the mirror-lined gallery, disappeared from his reflection entirely, causing the lord to scream and the hall to erupt in chaos. No trace of the boy remained, except for the whispers that followed for decades. The phenomenon was not confined to a single room or a single mirror. Entire wings of the castle seemed prone to these anomalies, particularly those mirrors that had been installed in secluded chambers or hidden alcoves. The placement of the mirrors, some believed, was intentional, perhaps designed to observe, manipulate, or punish. Historians now speculate that the original lord had an obsession with truth, vanity, and control, a man who wished to see all, yet whose own reflections may have betrayed him in ways that remain unknowable. Folklore from surrounding villages quickly intertwined with these events. It was said that mirrors in the castle were not mere glass, but portals or vessels. Some claimed that they trapped souls, holding them captive between worlds, while others whispered of curses passed down through the castle's bloodline. Mothers would warn children not to linger before a mirror, lest they vanish from sight and from memory, while travelers told tales of entire chambers where no one's reflection could ever appear. These stories, passed from generation to generation, blurred the line between fact and myth, embedding fear deep into the cultural consciousness surrounding the castle. Accounts from the castle itself reveal a pattern. Mirrors tended to reject those with secrets, those burdened by guilt or envy, or those who had wronged another in some small or terrible way. Servants' memoirs describe rooms where one could see oneself perfectly in the first mirror, only to approach another and find that reflection empty, as if the glass had judged them unworthy. Scholars have debated whether this was coincidence, a clever manipulation of perception by the castle's original designers, or something far more sinister, tied to forces beyond human understanding. Psychological explanations abound. Fear, suggestion, exhaustion, but none fully account for the consistency and detail of the reports. In every century, new witnesses experienced the same chilling anomaly. Even those who approached the mirrors skeptically, armed with candles, scientific curiosity, or sheer bravado, often recoiled in horror when faced with their own absence. The castle seemed to respond to its inhabitants, its mirrors acting as silent arbiters of truth, memory, and perhaps punishment. It was in these earliest days that the castle earned its reputation, a place where reflection was unreliable, where glass became a silent witness to both human folly and inexplicable phenomena. The first reflections, or lack thereof, set the tone for centuries of fear and fascination. Nobles, servants, scholars, and wanderers alike would come to understand that these mirrors were not merely decorative. They were active participants in the castle's history, shaping experience, haunting memory, and erasing existence in ways that would defy explanation. By the end of this period, a clear understanding had emerged, though it was spoken only in hushed tones. In this castle, mirrors were not passive. They chose whom to reflect, whom to obscure, and whom to claim entirely. And for anyone who dared to linger too long, to peer too intently, the consequences could be swift and merciless. In this way, the first reflections became both a warning and a lure, a signal that the castle's dark heart had begun to stir, and that no one who entered could ever assume they would leave as they had arrived. The castle's reputation grew over time, whispers of strange mirrors mutating into legends of a curse that preyed upon anyone who dared to gaze too long. It was no longer a mere curiosity or a trick of light. This was something far older, far darker, something that reached into the very essence of identity. The earliest chronicled incident speaks of Lady Isolde, a noble woman famed for her beauty and vanity. She had arrived at the castle to oversee a grand feast, her gown trailing behind her like a river of silk. Yet when she passed before the great hall mirrors, attendants recorded in trembling handwriting that her reflection refused to appear. Panic gripped the household. Lady Isolde was visible to all, moving and speaking, yet the mirrors betrayed her. Her face, the very mark of her presence, had vanished. Some claim Lady Isolde's disappearance from the mirrors was punishment. Legend suggests she had wronged a servant, dismissed a lover cruelly, or perhaps defied a family taboo. The records are vague, leaving room for imagination and dread. What is certain is that the castle itself seemed to judge. In the halls where mirrors had once faithfully reflected, they now rejected her entirely. Servants whispered that the mirrors had grown sentient, choosing whom to reveal and whom to erase. The episode set a precedent. It was no longer just a curiosity, but a curse, one that haunted not only the castle's walls, but the minds of all who lived within them. The curse seemed to operate on subtle rules, almost deliberately, as if the castle itself were an architect of justice or vengeance. Children of noble families sometimes vanished from reflections for mere hours, returning to mirrors' gaze only after some small lesson had been learned or some perceived slight atoned for. Adults, however, often experienced permanent absence, their faces gone from every mirror in the room, the castle, and sometimes the grounds beyond. Entire family portraits were affected, leaving gaps where a face once existed, creating a visual void in the tapestry of ancestry. This unnerving phenomenon suggested a cruel intelligence at work, one that could not be reasoned with, bargained with, or escaped. The villagers surrounding the castle grew terrified. At night, they would claim to hear the soft, despairing cries of those who had been claimed by the mirrors, drifting down from high towers. Rumors spread that the curse had a life of its own, feeding on vanity, envy, betrayal, or even casual cruelty. Some insisted that a face stolen from a mirror was not gone entirely. It existed somewhere between the glass and reality, trapped in a liminal void, visible only to those who knew the castle's secret paths. Priests, mystics, and scholars were called to intervene, attempting rituals to free the trapped souls, yet none succeeded. Each intervention only reinforced the idea that the castle was alive, its curse a self-sustaining mechanism, evolving across generations. The curse did not discriminate between social classes. Servants, knights, visiting diplomats, anyone who entered certain chambers risked disappearance from reflective surfaces. Accounts describe a cook vanishing entirely from the kitchen's polished copper surfaces, her presence only betrayed by the disturbed air or lingering smell of stew. A knight, proud and brave, disappeared from mirrors in the great armory after boasting of his strength. Only his armor remained behind, empty and tarnished. The randomness, the subtle moral judgment, and the impossibility of reversing the curse created a climate of constant fear. Everyone became hyper-aware of their actions, wary of crossing invisible lines, never certain whether their reflection would betray them next. In parallel, a sinister mythology emerged around the mirrors themselves. Some claimed the glass had absorbed centuries of anguish and resentment from the castle's many victims, becoming a sentient repository of emotion and intent. Others suggested that the curse originated in a single act of dark magic, a ritual performed by a disgraced noble or vengeful sorcerer, designed to punish vanity and preserve the castle's secrets. Every historian and folklorist who attempted to trace the curse's origin found themselves confronted by conflicting accounts. Some written records vanished inexplicably, others appeared contradictory, as if the mirrors themselves had altered the past to protect their secret. By the 17th century, the curse had cemented the castle's fearsome reputation. Nobles hesitated to accept invitations. Servants were often recruited unwillingly, bound by contracts they dared not violate. Guests were warned not to linger in certain wings, told that even a fleeting glance at the mirrors could result in permanent erasure. Yet the castle attracted curiosity as much as it inspired terror. Many were drawn by the allure of testing fate, daring to see if the curse was real or simply superstition. Most left with stories of absence, dread, and a nagging certainty that the castle's gaze lingered long after they had departed. The castle chronicles detail repeated attempts to break or circumvent the curse. Mirrors were removed, burned, or concealed behind drapes. Rooms were repurposed, left empty, or sealed entirely. Some families, desperate to avoid the curse's reach, abandoned wings or even entire floors. And yet, despite all measures, the phenomenon persisted. Mirrors placed anew continued to reflect selectively, sometimes rejecting those who had never been guilty of wrongdoing, suggesting that the curse's logic was unknowable, perhaps even independent of human morality. Ultimately, the curse of the vanishing faces became the defining feature of the castle's history. It was more than fear, more than legend. It was a living, breathing enigma that transcended time, ensnaring those who entered its walls in a web of uncertainty, terror, and fascination. Those who disappeared from mirrors were never fully lost, never fully explained, existing in a liminal space between reflection and reality, a haunting reminder that some forces in the world refuse to be understood. And for every visitor, noble or servant, the unspoken question lingered: would the castle choose them next? The castle's mirrors did not exist in isolation. They were entwined with the lives and legacies of those who inhabited its walls. Over centuries, families rose and fell within its shadow, their histories written as much in betrayal and ambition as in bloodlines and law. The noble houses that called the castle home were notorious, their lineages riddled with scandal, secrecy, and intrigue. Letters, diaries, and court records reveal a chilling pattern. Those who sought power or indulged in vanity often disappeared from mirrors first, leaving behind a legacy of fractured reflections, both literal and metaphorical. The earliest documented dynasty to inhabit the castle was the House of Valancourt. Generations of Valancourts were known for their pride, their obsession with appearances, and a relentless pursuit of influence. The family's patriarch, Lord Adrian Valancourt, was said to be a man of cunning intellect and ruthless ambition. He meticulously arranged the castle's mirrors, according to accounts, not just for aesthetics, but to monitor the household and his family. Some historians speculate that he intended the mirrors as instruments of control, perhaps to punish deception or vanity. Yet, according to surviving letters, even Adrian's closest confidants began to vanish from mirrors, suggesting that the curse recognized no authority, no immunity, not even the hand that might have orchestrated it. The tragedies continued with Adrian's children. One son, Armand, was rumored to have secretly consorted with a servant, defying strict social hierarchies. When he was next seen before the mirror in the East Wing, his reflection disappeared, leaving him alone in the room, trapped between reality and glass. Observers reported that Armand's behavior changed in the following weeks. Nervous, withdrawn, haunted by the absence of himself in every reflective surface. Soon, he fled the castle entirely, never to return. Another heir, a daughter named Ilara, vanished entirely during a family gathering, her presence absent from mirrors, portraits, and even waxen effigies. No explanation could account for these disappearances, and the pattern suggested something ancient and moralistic, something that punished transgression in ways humans could not control. The castle's other residents fared no better. Servants recorded betrayals and betrayals of trust that seemed to ripple through the household like poison. A chambermaid who had been caught stealing jewelry found her face missing from every polished surface for weeks. A stable hand who whispered secrets of the Lord's illicit dealings to outsiders vanished from mirrors entirely, though his physical body remained a hollow echo of himself. Each instance reinforced the idea that mirrors were not passive objects, but sentient arbiters, judging, punishing, and recording sins across generations. Bloodlines and betrayal were inseparable in the castle's history. Nobles conspired against one another, plotting murders, secret marriages, and schemes for inheritance, all under the gaze of mirrors that could betray or protect. A scandalous case involved the Valcourt's distant cousins, the Montreux family. They sought to claim the castle through inheritance, engaging in subterfuge and political maneuvering. Letters reveal that their attempts coincided with a series of vanishing reflections. Members of both families were affected, their images stolen, as if the castle itself had intervened. Whispers among the servants claimed the castle favored some bloodlines over others, but historical records provide no evidence, only absence, silence, and an ever-growing legacy of terror. Romantic betrayals also played a role. Lovers secretly meeting in the halls found themselves confronted with empty reflections, their identities erased in a cruel punishment for indiscretion. Some mirrors seemed to demand loyalty, others seemed to punish desire. One tale recounts a young noblewoman, engaged to a powerful lord, who fell in love with a visiting scholar. In a single night, both vanished from mirrors entirely, leaving witnesses unable to confirm their very existence. The incident became a cautionary tale. The castle's mirrors could not be deceived, and betrayal of family, of love, of duty would always find its mark. The castle's obsession with lineage and honor magnified the consequences of betrayal. Portraits hung in the great hall documented family trees, each face carefully painted to maintain a legacy of power and respect. Yet the curse infiltrated even these records. Some portraits showed blank faces where a vanished noble should have appeared. Wax effigies in the castle's private chambers bore no trace of the erased. It was as if the castle sought to correct, or perhaps rewrite, history itself, punishing disloyalty and moral weakness with absence rather than death, leaving witnesses haunted by what had been lost. In addition to personal betrayals, larger political intrigues intensified the curse's reach. Lords and ladies engaged in conspiracies with neighboring estates, plotting wars, alliances, and assassinations. When the schemes failed or treachery was revealed, the mirrors exacted their judgment. Accounts describe nobles finding themselves unable to see their reflections during critical negotiations, leaving them unsure of their appearance, their identity, their authority. Some historians suggest these events contributed to the castle's reputation as a place of doom, a seat of both political and supernatural judgment. Ultimately, the interplay of bloodlines and betrayals became central to the castle's legend. Its mirrors were more than decorative. They were active participants in the narrative of the household, enforcing moral and social order in ways that were invisible yet terrifyingly absolute. Generations learned to fear not only punishment from family or society, but also judgment from the castle itself. The mirror curse, intertwined with human weakness, created a landscape where ambition, desire, and deceit were constantly under scrutiny, and where a single misstep could erase a person's reflection, their identity, and their legacy. By the end of this era, the castle had become a repository of intertwined fates, a place where bloodlines and betrayals were inseparable from the vanishing reflections that haunted its halls. Every noble, every servant, every visitor became part of a long, terrifying history, a history dictated not by law or by human hands, but by the cold, silent judgment of mirrors that could see all, forgive nothing, and erase without mercy. In this way, the castle was not merely a home. It was a living testament to the consequences of betrayal, a dark cathedral where blood and reflection intertwined in a story that would endure for centuries. While the castle's history was etched in stone and blood, it was folklore that gave its mysteries life, shaping the way generations understood its terrifying power. In the villages surrounding the castle, parents whispered tales of mirrors that could steal a soul, reflections that betrayed secrets, and faces that vanished forever if vanity or deceit led a person astray. These stories spread quickly, carried by traveling merchants, wandering scholars, and superstitious servants. Over time, they became inseparable from the castle itself, entwining fact and legend so completely that outsiders could rarely distinguish one from the other. One enduring belief was that mirrors were not mere glass, but portals between worlds. European folklore across the centuries had long suggested that mirrors could act as thresholds, allowing spirits or entities to cross into the human realm or trapping souls that strayed too close. In the case of the castle, villagers insisted that certain mirrors were hungry, watching for the unwary or morally compromised. Those who gazed too long might find themselves erased, their reflection stolen, as if the mirror had consumed it. Servants' accounts from the 16th and 17th centuries describe waking to find their own reflections gone from polished surfaces, only to glimpse them later in fleeting, distorted flashes, shadows of themselves trapped somewhere between reality and glass. Some legends tied the mirrors to curses laid by vengeful spirits. It was said that the original lord of the castle, or perhaps a scorned ancestor, had performed rituals invoking dark forces to protect his lineage, ensure obedience, or punish disloyalty. The mirrors, crafted with rare metals and infused with substances from alchemical experiments, were rumored to be vessels for these forces. Folklore suggested that the mirrors absorbed emotion, sin, and guilt, acting as silent judges of all who entered the halls. A single glance could determine whether one was worthy to exist fully in the world or to vanish entirely from it. Stories also emerged of mirror twins, a concept found in several European folk traditions. In these tales, a person's reflection was more than a mere image. It was a secondary self, a shadow soul that could exist independently of the body. In the castle, villagers claimed a person's shadow self could be captured, manipulated, or even destroyed by the mirrors, leaving the original person physically present but psychologically incomplete. Tales of servants walking the halls in confusion, unable to recognize themselves in glass, or of nobles disappearing during mirrors' reflections at banquets, seemed to validate these frightening ideas. Mirrors became a liminal space where the living and the spectral overlapped, a stage on which human folly and supernatural judgment played out simultaneously. Local superstition imbued mirrors with moral significance. Vanity was a frequent target. Those obsessed with their appearance risked being stolen by the mirrors, their reflections vanishing as punishment for pride. But it was not vanity alone. Betrayal, envy, cruelty, and deceit were all thought to be observed and judged. A chronicler from the 17th century wrote of a young page who had lied about a theft, only to vanish from mirrors in his room. Though he remained physically present to serve, Anyone attempting to call his attention to his reflection found only absence. Villagers took these stories as cautionary tales, teaching that mirrors were instruments of moral reckoning as much as physical reflection. The castle's mirrors also played a role in divination and ritual. Folklore suggested that gazing into a mirror at midnight, under certain moon phases, could reveal hidden truths or glimpses of the future, but with terrifying risk. The unlucky or the unworthy might see themselves vanish, trapped in the mirror world, or witness events that had not yet come to pass, shrouded in distortion and horror. Stories told of ritualistic use by the castle's inhabitants, secret meetings in rooms lined with mirrors, and silent observances of those attempting forbidden acts. Mirrors were both tool and weapon, a duality that heightened their aura of dread. Across centuries, the castle became a nexus of folklore, a place where ordinary fear transformed into legend. Every mirror, every polished surface, carried the weight of accumulated stories, vanished faces, shadow souls, judgments enacted in silence. Visitors, whether scholars, nobles, or curious travelers, entered not just a physical space but a psychological one, where superstition and historical memory intertwined. Tales of mirrors behaving unpredictably, refusing to reflect certain individuals, or showing distorted forms, were passed from servant to servant, from villager to villager, embedding a persistent and almost ritualized fear into the collective imagination. Even contemporary historians acknowledge that the folklore surrounding the castle cannot be dismissed. While some elements are clearly embellished, many reports align with documented accounts of vanished reflections, bizarre disappearances, and unexplained phenomena. Folklore, in this sense, serves as both warning and record, a method of preserving memory where conventional history fails. It bridges the gap between the empirical and the paranormal, giving voice to centuries of fear, curiosity, and awe. Ultimately, the castle's mirrors became more than objects of superstition. They were symbols of judgment, portals between worlds, vessels for curses, and witnesses to centuries of human ambition and moral failing. Through folklore, the mirror's presence was amplified, creating a psychological landscape as treacherous as the castle's twisted corridors. To gaze into one was to confront the unknown, the self, and perhaps a force beyond comprehension, an ancient entity that could erase identity, rewrite history, and haunt the living through centuries of legend. In this way, folklore and mirror legends became inseparable from the castle's identity. They gave shape to fear, continuity to mystery, and a narrative thread that tied generations together in terror and fascination. Villagers, servants, nobles, and later, scholars, all understood the same chilling truth. The mirrors of the castle were not mirrors at all. They were sentinels, arbiters, and sometimes predators, capable of reflecting everything, nothing, or only what they willed to show. And in that selective reflection lay the enduring power of the castle's dark, enigmatic legacy. The castle's reputation as a place of vanished reflections and moral judgment was only the beginning. Over the centuries, it became known as a house of shadows, a place where light itself seemed reluctant to linger and where darkness had a will of its own. Visitors and residents alike reported encounters with shapes and figures that could not be explained by ordinary perception, silhouettes that flickered at the edges of vision, shadows that moved against the direction of light, and figures seen only within mirrors, never in the room itself. These were not mere tricks of the eye. They were manifestations of something older, something that had been bound to the castle's stones long before its first mirror was ever installed. Servants of the 16th and 17th centuries were the first to describe the phenomenon in detail. In diaries, they wrote of shadowed figures that appeared at the far end of hallways, stretching and shrinking unnaturally, sometimes mimicking the movements of the observer before dissolving into darkness. One account tells of a young maid who saw a figure with her own features, but twisted and incomplete, moving silently across the chamber floor. When she turned to confront it, the shadow vanished, leaving only a cold chill and the echo of her own heartbeat. Such experiences became increasingly common, yet explanations were scarce. Shadows seemed aware, deliberate, and tied intimately to the castle's mirrors and the curse that plagued them. The castle's corridors amplified the eeriness. Stairwells twisted upon themselves, alcoves appeared where none had existed, and candlelight bent strangely in the gloom. These architectural anomalies created perfect conditions for the shadows to manifest, or perhaps even to haunt. Witnesses often noted that shadows behaved differently depending on the observer's state of mind. Those consumed by guilt, fear, or vanity reported shadows that followed them closely, mimicked their movements, or seemed to whisper unintelligible words. Visitors unburdened by such emotions claimed not to see them, suggesting a connection between human consciousness and the castle's dark phenomena. Mirrors and shadows were inseparable in the castle's lore. Many witnesses described their own shadow, or that of others, appearing in mirrors where it should not have existed, moving independently, sometimes warning, sometimes threatening. One particularly chilling account tells of a nobleman who, after committing a betrayal within the family, saw a shadow emerge from a mirror in the grand hall, replicate his actions, and then step forward, leaving him paralyzed with fear. It was as if the shadows were sentinels of justice, echoing the castle's long history of moral retribution and vanishing reflections. Over time, the shadows themselves became woven into local superstition. Villagers claimed that they were the remnants of those erased from mirrors, lingering as dark echoes between the castle's walls and the spectral plains beyond. Servants swore they had spoken to these shadows, that they moved objects, whispered names, and sometimes guided the living to avoid hidden dangers. Some shadowed figures, the legends say, were benevolent, helping those who had strayed too close to the castle's punishments. Others were malevolent, exacting retribution, feeding off fear, or reinforcing the curse by appearing to torment those already marked by the mirrors. The darkest tales describe encounters that defied the limits of ordinary horror. Visitors entering rooms at night reported shadows peeling themselves from the walls, stretching across ceilings, and moving as if searching for something, often the observer themselves. A chronicler recounts a night when an entire banquet hall was filled with hundreds of shadowy forms, all frozen in a moment of silent accusation, their shapes reflecting in mirrors at impossible angles. Guests fled in terror, some screaming, others unable to speak. When morning came, the hall was empty, save for faint outlines etched into the dust-covered floor, an eerie testimony to events that had occurred only in the liminal space between reality and nightmare. Psychologists and modern investigators have suggested these phenomena could be explained by perception, fear, or mass suggestion. Yet the consistency and specificity of the accounts across centuries challenge such reasoning. The shadows obeyed rules. They often mirrored moral failings, appeared alongside vanished reflections, and interacted with mirrors in ways that suggested awareness and intelligence. For many, these were not hallucinations, but evidence of a living, conscious entity or entities bound to the castle, intertwined with its mirrors, its architecture, and its long history of curses and disappearances. The House of Shadows also created a new dimension of terror, anticipation. Even when empty hallways and rooms felt alive, visitors reported a sense of being watched, of light bending and shifting unnaturally, of corners darkening in impossible ways. Every step could summon a shadow, every mirror a partial reflection. It was a psychological landscape designed to unnerve and disorient. But there was more, a suggestion that the castle itself had become sentient, a repository of centuries of fear, sin, and memory, using shadows to interact with, punish, and protect. Ultimately, the shadows reinforced the castle's identity as more than a building. They were evidence of its consciousness, a manifestation of centuries of cruelty, vanity, and betrayal, and a mirror, metaphorical as well as literal, of human weakness. The House of Shadows was not merely haunted. It was alive, an ecosystem of fear and memory where reflections and shadows coexisted, each influencing the other, each shaping the experiences of those who dared enter. It was a place where the past never truly ended, where every moral transgression could be observed, echoed, and punished, and where every visitor had the chilling possibility of becoming a shadow themselves, forever bound to the castle's dark will. The castle was vast, a labyrinth of stone and shadow, and within its sprawling corridors lay chambers so secretive, so forbidding, that even the most seasoned servants hesitated to speak their names aloud. These were the forbidden chambers, hidden behind false walls, secret doors, and corridors designed to twist perception and disorient the unwary. Many rooms were locked by heavy iron doors, others concealed by intricate mechanisms only the Lord or his closest advisors could operate. Over centuries, they became synonymous with fear, secrecy, and, inevitably, the mirrors. Some of these rooms were said to have been constructed for rituals, arcane ceremonies whose purpose has been lost to time. Chronicles hint at elaborate gatherings in which mirrors were arranged in precise geometries, reflecting not only the room, but the participants themselves, amplifying both sight and sound in ways that distorted reality. It was believed that these configurations could trap energy, summon unseen forces, or, in some accounts, capture souls. Servants who stumbled upon these chambers unexpectedly often reported feelings of disorientation, vertigo, and a creeping sense of being watched, followed by inexplicable illness or sudden, intense fear. Other chambers were less esoteric, but no less forbidding. The Lord's private studies, lined with mirrors and books on alchemy, magic, and forbidden knowledge, were said to contain documents and artifacts of tremendous power and danger. Some mirrors in these rooms did not reflect people at all, while others showed distorted versions of the present or glimpses of events long past. One diary entry from the late 1600s describes a noblewoman opening a mirror and seeing herself as an older version, her expression twisted in anguish, a reflection that vanished when she turned. These chambers, even for the nobility, were both alluring and terrifying, a private confrontation with the unknown. Perhaps the most infamous forbidden chambers were those located in the castle's towers, rooms that had been sealed for decades, even centuries. Rumors suggested that these towers contained mirrors that functioned as portals to other realms, though no visitor could ever confirm this. Accounts of explorers and servants hint at whispers in these rooms, soft voices that called by name, shadows that moved independently of light, and reflections that appeared only to some and never to others. These chambers were said to hold the memories of those who had vanished from mirrors, echoing the curse through space and time. Some who entered reported being followed by shadowy figures long after leaving, as if the chamber had imprinted itself on their psyche, refusing to release them. The architecture of the forbidden chambers was deliberate, designed to evoke disorientation and unease. Floors sloped subtly, walls bent unnaturally, and ceilings seemed higher or lower depending on the observer's position. Mirrors were positioned to reflect hallways that did not exist, creating impossible angles and duplicating the observer endlessly. Light behaved erratically. Candles flickered in ways inconsistent with natural drafts. Many visitors reported seeing multiple versions of themselves, some emerging from shadows, others frozen in impossible postures, all silently observing. It was an experience that left even the most rational minds questioning perception, reality, and the boundary between the living and the reflected. Historical accounts suggest that some forbidden chambers were used for punishment. Nobles or servants who had committed transgressions sometimes found themselves confined in these rooms, left to face mirrors that reflected distorted, accusatory versions of themselves. Some scholars speculate that the mirror curse, which had long haunted the castle, may have been amplified or deliberately manipulated in these spaces. A chamber's architecture, combined with the curse's inexplicable power, created a psychological trap. A mirror might erase an individual's reflection, while a shadow, previously hidden, could emerge to confront them. Over time, these practices blurred the line between intentional punishment and supernatural intervention. One chamber, known only in fragmented documents as the Hall of the Vanished, is said to have contained dozens of mirrors arranged in a circle. Here, guests reportedly saw not their own reflection, but the faces of those who had disappeared before them: ancestors, servants, lovers, betrayers. Some mirrors showed faces twisted in agony. Others were peaceful, yet all were unmistakably absent from the world outside the glass. Witnesses described a sense of vertigo, as if the hall itself existed partially outside of time, allowing glimpses of the past, present, and possibly even the future. Attempts to map the room's design failed, for the mirror's reflections often contradicted the physical layout, creating a visual and psychological maze that left visitors trapped in a cycle of observation and fear. Another chamber, referred to in folklore as the Silent Wing, was said to contain mirrors that would only reflect the guilty or the morally compromised. Servants and nobles alike avoided the wing, recounting tales of faces absent in the glass, whispers of old betrayals floating through the air, and shadows that seemed to move with intelligence. Some reported that even after leaving, the chamber's influence lingered. Hallucinations, fleeting glimpses of shadowed figures, or feelings of being watched that would persist for days. These experiences reinforced the belief that the castle itself was sentient, a living entity that used mirrors to observe, judge, and manipulate its inhabitants. The Forbidden Chambers also played a role in the castle's rituals of secrecy. Records indicate that family councils, secret trials, and clandestine meetings often took place in these rooms, away from prying eyes. Mirrors were sometimes used to monitor loyalty or obedience, catching misdeeds or witnessing conversations without detection. The chambers, therefore, served both practical and supernatural functions, spaces where human intrigue intersected with the castle's dark, inexplicable forces. In many ways, the Forbidden Chambers were the heart of the castle's enigma, where history, architecture, and paranormal activity converged to create experiences that defied comprehension. Ultimately, the Forbidden Chambers were more than hidden rooms. They were vessels of the castle's power and memory. Mirrors reflected, concealed, and sometimes erased, creating a complex ecosystem of observation, judgment, and fear. To enter one was to confront centuries of moral transgressions, vanished faces, and lingering shadows. These chambers demonstrated the castle's duality, a place of grandeur and horror, of beauty and terror, where human ambition, folly, and curiosity were intertwined with forces beyond understanding. They were proof that the castle was not merely a building, but a living entity, an architectural enigma that had learned to watch, punish, and perhaps even remember, using mirrors as both instruments and witnesses of its dark will. For centuries, the castle's mirrors, vanishing faces, and shadowed corridors remained the stuff of whispered stories and folklore. But as historians, chroniclers, and eventually paranormal investigators began to take an interest, attempts to document and understand its mysteries became more systematic. These historical investigations sought to separate fact from legend, to uncover the truth behind the centuries of terror recorded in diaries, letters, and village lore. And yet, even the most meticulous research only deepened the enigma. Early investigations, beginning in the 17th and 18th centuries, relied heavily on written records and first-hand account from servants, nobles, and travelers. Some chroniclers attempted to map the castle's mirrors, recording which rooms produced anomalies and which did not. One record, now preserved in a fragmented manuscript, describes a mirror in the East Wing that consistently refused to reflect certain nobles during council meetings, while reflecting others without distortion. Investigators noted the apparent selectivity of the phenomenon, suggesting that the mirrors responded not merely to presence, but to social hierarchy, moral conduct, or perhaps some intangible quality of the observer. As the centuries passed, more structured investigations emerged. Enlightenment-era scholars applied the scientific method, attempting to measure light, angles, and perception to explain the vanishing faces. They conducted experiments, documenting results meticulously in journals, yet consistently found inconsistencies. Mirrors placed in supposedly identical conditions produced different outcomes. Individuals reported disappearing in some mirrors but appearing normally in others. Attempts to replicate the phenomenon in laboratories failed, reinforcing the idea that the castle itself, rather than the mirrors alone, played a crucial role in the anomalies. In the 19th century, as the field of parapsychology began to take shape, investigators approached the castle with a combination of historical rigor and emerging theories of the paranormal. Reports from this era are particularly chilling, as observers described fleeting figures, whispering voices, and shadows that interacted with mirrors in unpredictable ways. One notable investigation recorded multiple vanishing faces during a single evening, despite careful observation and lighting controls. Investigators documented fear and hesitation among those present, noting that even rational, educated individuals were unable to maintain composure in the castle's unsettling environment. These accounts reinforced the notion that the castle was more than a physical structure. It had become an active participant in its own legend. Some investigations turned to folklore itself as a source of insight. Historians and ethnographers studied local myths about mirror curses, shadow souls, and spirits bound to reflective surfaces. They compared these stories to documented incidents in the castle, noting striking similarities: selective vanishing, moral judgment, and the appearance of shadowed forms. It became increasingly clear that folklore and historical record were not separate but intertwined, each informing the other. Villagers' accounts, dismissed for centuries as superstition, provided critical context for understanding the castle's influence on perception and behavior. The 20th century brought modern photography, early motion pictures, and eventually video recording into the investigation. Paranormal researchers attempted to capture vanishing reflections and shadow phenomena on film, hoping to provide empirical evidence of the castle's anomalies. While some footage was inconclusive or dismissed as optical illusions, other material remains deeply unsettling. Faces appearing partially or not at all in mirrors, shadowed figures moving independently, and distortions that could not be explained by lighting or camera angles. These recordings, preserved in archives, continue to fascinate researchers and enthusiasts alike, raising questions about perception, reality, and the intersection of folklore with unexplained phenomena. Historical investigations also uncovered patterns linking the mirrors to tragic events. Diaries and letters revealed that disappearances often coincided with moments of moral conflict, betrayal, or extreme emotional distress. Scholars debated whether this was coincidence, psychological suggestion, or an actual supernatural mechanism. The castle's design further complicated analysis. Secret passages, false corridors, and disorienting architecture may have amplified fear and confusion, making vanishing faces both a psychological and possibly paranormal phenomenon. Each study highlighted the challenge of distinguishing between natural causes and the inexplicable, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. A particularly significant set of investigations focused on the castle's archives. Researchers discovered that some documents have been deliberately altered or destroyed over centuries, as if the castle itself had sought to conceal elements of its history. Records of vanished faces, shadowed figures, and forbidden chambers were often fragmented, leaving gaps that could not be reconciled. Folklorists and historians theorized that the castle's influence extended beyond mirrors and shadows, perhaps affecting memory, record-keeping, and even perception itself. This led to a radical conclusion. The castle was not merely haunted, it was an active participant in shaping history, observing, erasing, and rewriting events according to unknown rules. Modern investigations have combined historical research with scientific inquiry and experiential observation. Experts in psychology, architecture, folklore, and parapsychology have explored the castle in teams, documenting anomalies, interviewing witnesses, and analyzing environmental factors. While some researchers remain skeptical, none have fully explained the phenomenon. Mirrors still refuse to reflect certain faces. Shadows appear independently of light, and forbidden chambers continue to evoke intense fear. The castle endures as a site where empirical observation, folklore, and human experience collide, leaving a haunting legacy that defies definitive explanation. Ultimately, historical investigations reveal both the castle's mystery and its power. Centuries of observation demonstrate that this is not a simple haunted house, but a structure with a complex, perhaps sentient relationship to those who enter. Mirrors are more than glass. They are witnesses and judges. Shadows are more than absence. They are echoes of history and morality. And those who vanish from sight remain as reminders of the castle's enduring influence, a testament to a place where observation, judgment, and fear have intertwined for centuries. The castle's mysteries persist, inviting further inquiry while ensuring that its darkness is never fully understood. A living, breathing enigma that watches and waits for the next visitor brave or foolish enough to enter. The castle's legacy of vanished faces, shadowed corridors, and forbidden chambers did not fade with time. Even in the modern era, it continues to inspire fear, fascination, and a profound sense of the uncanny. Travelers, historians, paranormal investigators, and even casual tourists have reported encounters that echo centuries-old tales, suggesting that the castle's mirrors, shadows, and hidden chambers retain their power, indifferent to the passing of time. These haunting modern accounts form a bridge between historical legend and contemporary experience, proving that the castle's mysteries are not confined to dusty manuscripts or folklore. They are alive, persistent, and immediate. One of the most frequently cited modern experiences comes from the early 20th century, when photography became widely accessible. A visiting nobleman, curious about the castle's dark reputation, arranged for a professional portrait in the Grand Hall. The photograph, developed days later, revealed an empty silhouette where the man had stood. Observers who had been present at the sitting reported that he had appeared perfectly in reality, moving and speaking normally. The sudden absence in the photograph mirrored the centuries-old phenomenon. Mirrors, reflections, or surfaces that should record reality, refusing to acknowledge it. The incident sparked renewed interest among academics, paranormal enthusiasts, and local villagers, many of whom recalled similar accounts passed down in family stories. In the 1960s and 1970s, as paranormal investigation techniques evolved, teams equipped with cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and audio recorders began systematic explorations of the castle. They encountered experiences that defied conventional explanation. A researcher described entering a corridor lined with mirrors, only to notice her reflection lagging behind her movements, as if moving independently. In the same corridor, a shadow crossed the floor without any corresponding light source or object, disappearing when approached. Recordings captured faint whispers, low murmurs in languages unknown, and cold spots that intensified near certain mirrors. Such experiences were consistent with historical accounts, reinforcing the notion that the castle's phenomena were ongoing and not bound by time. Perhaps the most chilling modern accounts involve visitors who attempt to engage with the mirrors directly. Several reports detail individuals approaching a mirror to observe themselves, only to find their reflection absent or distorted. One account describes a young historian who stood before a mirror in a formerly forbidden chamber, documenting the castle's architecture. When he looked up from his notes, his reflection was gone entirely. Panic overtook him, and though he retreated from the chamber, he later recounted feeling as though a part of him had been left behind, intangible but real. The psychological impact of these encounters mirrors the fear reported by servants and nobles centuries earlier, suggesting continuity in the castle's influence across generations. Some modern visitors have reported glimpses of vanished ancestors within the mirrors, faces partially visible in fragments of glass, or shadowed figures that appear only at the periphery of vision. One paranormal investigator described a circular mirror room where hundreds of reflections shimmered and then dissolved into darkness, leaving empty space where faces should have been. Witnesses consistently describe a sense of being observed by forces both human and inhuman, a feeling of moral judgment, and a growing understanding that the castle's influence is not merely visual. It affects perception, cognition, and emotion in ways that science cannot fully explain. Interestingly, many of these experiences appear to respond to human psychology. Mirrors and shadows often target individuals who exhibit curiosity, arrogance, or obsession, echoing the moralistic patterns described in historical records. Others report being affected even in moments of innocuous presence. Casual exploration, academic research, or photography can trigger vanishing reflections or shadow phenomena. The castle appears to know when a person enters, responding selectively and amplifying fear and uncertainty. Modern accounts suggest a form of intelligence at work, whether natural, supernatural, or something beyond current comprehension. Technological attempts to document the phenomena further reinforce the castle's mysterious character. Video cameras capture distortions, faces fading mid-frame, shadows moving independently, and reflections misaligned with reality. Thermal imaging reveals cold spots that shift unpredictably, often coinciding with mirror anomalies. Audio recordings frequently pick up whispers, footfalls, or sudden silences in otherwise quiet rooms. While skeptics argue that these could be equipment malfunctions, psychological suggestion, or environmental anomalies, patterns emerge across decades and multiple observers, implying that the castle exerts a consistent, observable influence. Even tourists today report similar experiences. Those venturing into the castle's corridors, especially the formerly forbidden chambers, describe a palpable tension, the sense of being watched, and occasional vanishing reflections. Some speak of mirrors that reveal distorted, aged, or anguished versions of themselves, as if the castle compresses time or displays an alternate reality. Others have seen faces of strangers in mirrors, often those who had vanished from historical records, providing a chilling visual continuity across centuries. These experiences suggest that the castle's power transcends time, connecting past and present through its reflective surfaces. Modern psychology attempts to rationalize these encounters as a combination of expectation, fear, and optical illusion. Yet, for many witnesses, the experiences feel tangible and irreversible. Vanished reflections, shadowed figures, and whispering voices create a sense of moral and existential judgment, echoing historical accounts that attribute the castle's phenomena to selective, intelligent forces. This intersection of folklore, historical documentation, and modern observation reinforces the castle's reputation as a living enigma. With a human mind, architecture, and supernatural influence converge to produce experiences beyond explanation. Ultimately, these haunting modern accounts demonstrate that the castle is not merely a relic of the past. It is a continuously evolving entity, interacting with each visitor, responding to perception and behavior, and maintaining its legacy of terror and fascination. Mirrors refuse to reflect, shadows move independently, and forbidden chambers continue to hold secrets that challenge reason. The castle's mysteries persist, bridging centuries of human experience, folklore, and investigation, proving that the enigma of vanished faces, moral judgment, and living darkness endures in the present just as powerfully as it did in centuries long past. The castle's terror was not limited to vanished reflections or shadowed corridors. Its most insidious influence was psychological. Across centuries, servants, nobles, and visitors alike reported experiences that left lasting mental and emotional scars. Prolonged exposure to the mirrors, shadows, and forbidden chambers altered perception, eroded self-confidence, and in some cases, induced paranoia and delusions. These psychological effects reveal the human cost of the castle's enduring mysteries and illuminate why it remained a place of fear, obsession, and fascination. Servants, who spent the most time navigating the castle's labyrinthine halls, were often the first to experience these effects. Diaries and letters reveal that they developed heightened vigilance, constantly scanning reflections and shadows for anomalies. Minor inconsistencies, a missing reflection, a flicker at the edge of a mirror, a shadow moving out of sync with the light, could provoke panic, sleepless nights, and even fainting. Chroniclers describe cases of staff who, after extended service, refused to enter certain wings entirely, sometimes abandoning employment altogether. Over time, these behavioral patterns contributed to the castle's eerie atmosphere, reinforcing the cycle of fear for all who entered. Nobles were not immune. Many were driven to obsession, meticulously observing themselves in mirrors, noting minute distortions or lapses, and compiling journals that documented every anomalous occurrence. One account describes a lord who spent hours each day scrutinizing his reflection, convinced that the mirror would reveal a hidden betrayal or premonition. Over time, he became withdrawn, paranoid, and emotionally fragile, ultimately suffering a psychological breakdown. Letters from his contemporaries reflect both concern and fear, noting that even high-born individuals could not resist the castle's subtle, persistent influence on the mind. The forbidden chambers, in particular, amplified psychological strain. The architecture itself, twisting corridors, sloped floors, distorted ceilings, and mirrors positioned at impossible angles, created disorientation and vertigo. Visitors reported a sense of unreality, as if the boundaries between self, reflection, and shadow had dissolved. Combined with the castle's historical aura and the knowledge of vanished faces, these chambers induced acute anxiety, often resulting in trembling, panic attacks, and dissociation. Some accounts suggest that extended exposure led to long-term psychological effects, including post-traumatic stress, recurring nightmares, and obsessive behaviors related to mirrors and reflections. Modern psychological studies of the castle, though limited, support historical observations. Investigators who spent prolonged periods in the castle report heightened stress, hypervigilance, and disturbances in spatial perception. Mirrors appeared to distort perception subtly, creating a sense of movement where none existed or erasing elements of the environment entirely. Shadows were often interpreted as threatening or accusatory, even when objectively explainable. These experiences suggest a form of induced psychosis, a combination of environmental manipulation and deeply ingrained cultural fears surrounding the castle's mirrors and legends. The castle's influence extended beyond the conscious mind. Sleep disturbances were common among inhabitants, with nightmares that mirrored historical tragedies, vanished faces, or shadowed figures. Servants and nobles alike reported waking in panic, feeling the presence of unseen observers or being pursued by shadows that were not physically present. Over time, the distinction between reality and hallucination blurred, reinforcing the castle's reputation as a place where perception could not be trusted. Mental strain intensified, creating an environment of fear that perpetuated itself across generations. A particularly haunting psychological effect was the emergence of self-doubt and identity erosion. Individuals who experienced vanishing reflections reported a disorienting sense of absence, as if part of themselves had been erased. This loss often induced obsessive behaviors, with inhabitants repeatedly checking mirrors, questioning their own existence, and attempting to reconcile memory with perception. Chroniclers noted that this effect could become socially isolating. Individuals withdrew from conversation and communal life, fearing judgment, betrayal, or the unpredictable whims of the castle's mirrors. In some cases, entire families experienced strain, with mistrust and paranoia spreading as each member interpreted vanishing reflections as moral or spiritual warnings. Psychological trauma was compounded by the castle's folklore and historical legacy. From childhood, villagers learned stories of vanished faces, shadowed corridors, and forbidden chambers. Servants entering the castle carried these stories with them, predisposing them to heightened fear and anticipatory anxiety. Nobles, aware of historical accounts of disappearances and moral judgment, often internalized this fear, interpreting minor anomalies as omens or direct threats. The castle's psychological effects were therefore not merely reactive but cumulative, shaped by centuries of expectation, superstition, and lived experience. Even short-term visitors reported symptoms of cognitive dissonance. Historical investigators, tourists, and modern paranormal teams frequently describe moments of disorientation, memory lapses, and emotional instability after entering the castle. Repeated exposure intensified these effects. Observers became hyper-aware of every shadow, every reflection, and every subtle movement, creating a feedback loop of fear and anxiety. In this sense, the castle operated as both a physical and psychological trap, a place where architecture, mirrors, folklore, and history intersected to produce an environment that manipulated perception and destabilized the mind. Ultimately, the psychological effects of the castle reveal the human cost of living, or even visiting, within its walls. Mirrors that vanish selectively, shadows that move independently, and forbidden chambers that distort perception create a landscape in which fear, paranoia, and obsession thrive. The castle does not merely punish wrongdoing or vanity. It reshapes consciousness itself, leaving inhabitants, visitors, and descendants marked by a history of terror. In understanding these psychological dimensions, we gain insight into why the castle's legends endure, why the fears of centuries continue to resonate, and why the mysteries of vanished faces, sentient shadows, and reflective judgment remain as potent today as they were in centuries past. The castle, in essence, becomes a mirror of the mind itself, reflecting fear, guilt, and curiosity back upon the observer. Its influence is not confined to mirrors or shadows alone, but permeates thought, emotion, and identity. The psychological effects serve as both warning and testament. Those who enter must navigate not only the castle's architecture and history, but the fragile and malleable contours of their own consciousness, aware that the boundaries between self, reflection, and shadow may never be entirely secure. The castle's dark reputation extended beyond mirrors, shadows, and forbidden chambers. Over centuries, a collection of objects and artifacts accumulated within its walls, each carrying a story of tragedy, fear, or inexplicable power. These were not ordinary possessions. They were cursed, imbued with the history of the castle and the lingering energy of those who had vanished, betrayed, or suffered within its halls. Visitors and inhabitants alike learned quickly that to touch, observe, or even pass near certain items was to risk the castle's judgment, and sometimes one's very reflection. Among the most infamous artifacts were the ceremonial mirrors themselves. Some were ornate, gilded frames embedded with strange metals or etched with sigils whose meanings have been lost to time. Legends suggested these mirrors were vessels, capturing not only light and image, but essence, morality, and memory. Individuals who stood before these mirrors reported seeing distorted reflections, faces twisted in anguish, multiple versions of themselves, or complete absence. In certain cases, the mirrors appeared to respond to human behavior, punishing vanity, deceit, or cruelty by erasing reflections or projecting shadowed figures. The mirrors became not only objects of fascination, but instruments of fear, and the curse that accompanied them intertwined with the castle's very identity. Other cursed objects included paintings and family portraits. While some depicted serene ancestors or idyllic landscapes, others bore subtle anomalies. Eyes that seemed to follow viewers, smiles that shifted when unobserved, or faint shadows that moved across canvases. Visitors often reported a creeping unease near these works, as though the images contained fragments of memory or consciousness from vanished individuals. Some portraits even seemed to interact with mirrors. A face absent from a reflection might appear in a painting nearby, creating an unnerving cycle of observation and erasure. Scholars suggest these anomalies may have arisen from deliberate alchemical processes, psychological manipulation, or the castle's own sentient influence. Sculptures and effigies also carried a reputation for malevolence. Marble statues, often life-sized, were positioned strategically in hallways and chambers. Witnesses described subtle movements when unobserved, tilts of the head, shifts of the hand, or changes in expression. Some effigies bore the likenesses of individuals whose faces had vanished from mirrors, creating a haunting reminder of the curse's reach. In the forbidden chambers, these effigies were sometimes placed near mirrors, amplifying the psychological impact. Modern visitors report feeling watched or judged by these statues, as if they were sentinels enforcing the castle's unseen moral code. Cursed books and manuscripts were another source of dread. The castle's library contained volumes written in cryptic scripts, sometimes detailing rituals, alchemy, or genealogies, but often leaving readers unsettled. One manuscript, referred to in archival records as the Book of Echoed Faces, allegedly contained descriptions of individuals whose reflections had been stolen, along with instructions on mirrors and shadow manipulation. Readers reported feeling the presence of vanished souls, hearing whispers when alone, and sometimes experiencing fleeting visual distortions that mirrored the historical vanishings. Scholars who attempted to study the texts extensively reported headaches, anxiety, and vivid nightmares, symptoms suggesting that the artifacts themselves could influence the mind. Smaller items, from jewelry to ceremonial utensils, also carried inexplicable influence. Rings, pendants, and brooches were said to retain fragments of their previous owner's personalities or fates. Those who wore or touched them sometimes reported hallucinations, an unsettling sense of being observed, or, in extreme cases, brief erasure from mirrors. Even mundane objects, such as polished silver trays or candlesticks, were rumored to act as conduits for the castle's power, reflecting selectively or creating optical illusions that preyed on fear and expectation. Folklore described these artifacts as extensions of the castle itself, vessels for centuries of moral judgment, observation, and memory. Many cursed objects were associated with specific tragedies. A particular mirror in the East Wing, for example, was linked to the disappearance of a noble woman whose betrayal of a lover had supposedly provoked the castle's judgment. Portraits in the same wing depicted family members whose faces later vanished from mirrors, while statues in adjacent halls seemed to echo their movements. These objects, combined with the castle's architecture, mirrors, and shadows, created an ecosystem of fear and observation, one that reinforced the castle's sentient reputation. Modern investigations have attempted to catalog and study these artifacts systematically. Photographers, historians, and paranormal researchers have documented recurring phenomena: mirrors that fail to reflect certain individuals, portraits that appear to shift or change subtly, and effigies that evoke profound unease. Audio and visual recordings occasionally capture phenomena aligned with historical accounts: shadowy movements, fleeting reflections, or whispers echoing near specific objects. While skeptics often attribute these experiences to psychological suggestion or optical illusion, the consistency and specificity of reports across centuries suggest a continuity of influence that cannot be easily dismissed. The cursed artifacts also reveal the castle's role as a repository of human behavior, memory, and morality. Mirrors, portraits, statues, and manuscripts act as witnesses, preserving both identity and transgression, projecting moral judgment across time. They link the vanished faces of history to modern observers, creating a persistent narrative in which every generation becomes both participant and witness. The objects are more than possessions. They're active agents in the castle's ecosystem, shaping perception, behavior, and understanding in ways both subtle and profound. Ultimately, the cursed artifacts are emblematic of the castle's enduring power. They embody the intersection of human ambition, vanity, betrayal, and fear with forces that defy rational explanation. Each object carries not only a story, but a presence, influencing those who encounter it, echoing centuries of vanished faces and shadowed corridors. Together, they create a tangible legacy of the castle's dark history, ensuring that its mysteries are experienced, remembered, and feared long after the events themselves have passed. In the presence of these objects, visitors confront not only the castle's enigma, but also the fragility of perception, morality, and identity. Reminders that in this place, nothing is truly inert, and every reflection, shadow, and artifact is a potential agent of its relentless, enduring judgment. Today, the castle stands as both a historical monument and a living testament to centuries of dark mystery, vanishing reflections, and shadowed corridors. Its walls, steeped in stories of betrayal, vanished faces, and cursed mirrors, attract historians, paranormal investigators, and curious travelers alike. Preservation efforts have sought to protect its architecture and artifacts, yet the castle retains an air of foreboding that no restoration can erase. Every stone, corridor, and mirror continues to hold the weight of centuries of observation, judgment, and fear. The castle has undergone significant conservation work over the past century. Structural restorations have stabilized crumbling walls, reinforced towers, and repaired damage caused by natural decay. Historians and architects have meticulously documented the building's original features, including its labyrinthine hallways, hidden chambers, and distinctive placement of mirrors. These efforts, however, have often been conducted with caution, as even minimal disturbance of the castle's interior seems to awaken subtle anomalies. Visitors report that some mirrors react unpredictably after restoration, reflecting distortions or vanishing faces, while shadows shift unnaturally in rooms that have been carefully preserved. The castle, it seems, defies complete control, retaining its mysterious and sentient qualities even under human stewardship. Public tours of the castle have made it accessible to a wider audience, yet the experience remains unnerving. Guides recount stories of vanished faces, shadowed corridors, and forbidden chambers, often emphasizing the psychological and paranormal phenomena reported over the centuries. Guests are warned of the castle's mirrors, told of shadowed figures, and cautioned to respect areas sealed or restricted for preservation. Even in modern times, visitors report fleeting glimpses of vanishing reflections, whispers in empty hallways, and an unsettling sensation of being observed. These encounters echo those of servants, nobles, and investigators from centuries past, suggesting continuity of the castle's mysterious influence. Modern technology has been integrated into preservation and investigation efforts. High-resolution imaging, environmental monitoring, and 3D mapping are used to study the castle's structure and artifacts, including mirrors, portraits, statues, and manuscripts. Researchers analyze anomalies in light, reflection, and shadow, attempting to document phenomena that may correlate with historical accounts. While scientific inquiry provides valuable insights, it has yet to fully explain the selective vanishing of reflections or the independent movement of shadows. The castle continues to resist definitive analysis, its mysteries eluding both folklore and empirical study. Legends surrounding the castle remain vibrant, preserved not only in written accounts but in oral tradition. Villagers recount tales of vanished nobles, cursed mirrors, and shadowed corridors with the same reverence and fear that characterized earlier centuries. Even local festivals, guided tours, and cultural narratives reinforce the castle's enigmatic reputation. These stories serve as both warning and allure. They remind visitors that the castle is not merely a historical site, but a living repository of centuries of human ambition, moral judgment, and supernatural possibility. The castle's legends are thus inseparable from its physical presence, ensuring that its mysteries are experienced, remembered, and retold across generations. The castle's influence also extends into media, literature, and popular culture. Documentaries, novels, and paranormal investigations frequently feature the castle, drawing attention to its mirrors, shadows, and forbidden chambers. While dramatizations often embellish historical facts, they amplify the psychological and cultural impact of the castle's mysteries. Visitors often enter the castle with expectations shaped by these portrayals, which may enhance the perception of vanishing reflections, shadow phenomena, and the weight of centuries-old curses. In this way, the castle continues to shape human experience, not only through its architecture and artifacts, but through collective imagination and storytelling. Preservationists face unique challenges in balancing public access with the protection of fragile artifacts and structures. Mirrors, portraits, and manuscripts are sensitive to light, temperature, and humidity, while corridors and chambers require careful stabilization. At the same time, the castle's dark history and mysterious phenomena necessitate restrictions, including limited access to certain forbidden chambers and carefully controlled lighting to prevent damage and mitigate psychological stress. These measures reflect an understanding that the castle is not simply a historical relic, but an active participant in the experience of those who enter, with its influence persisting in both tangible and intangible ways. Even today, some areas remain off-limits due to persistent paranormal activity. Forbidden chambers, known for vanishing reflections, shadow phenomena, and disorienting architecture, are accessible only to researchers under strict supervision. Artifacts associated with curses, mirrors, statues, portraits, and manuscripts are protected in climate-controlled rooms, yet they continue to elicit fear, fascination, and anecdotal reports of anomalous activity. Visitors often describe a palpable tension in these spaces, a lingering sense that the castle itself is aware, observing, and perhaps judging. These modern accounts resonate with historical records, reinforcing the idea that the castle's mysteries are enduring, not diminished by centuries or preservation efforts. The castle today embodies a duality. It is both museum and enigma, historical site and living mystery. Conservation efforts preserve its physical integrity, while folklore, legend, and modern observation preserve its psychological and paranormal presence. Visitors experience a space where history, morality, fear, and imagination intersect, encountering mirrors that reflect selectively, shadows that move independently, and artifacts imbued with centuries of energy. Each encounter reinforces the castle's identity as a place where human ambition, folly, and curiosity are observed, remembered, and, in some cases, punished. Ultimately, the castle today represents continuity, a bridge between centuries of historical events, psychological influence, folklore, and paranormal phenomena. Its preservation allows new generations to engage with its mysteries, while legends and oral history ensure that its power remains vivid and compelling. The mirrors, shadows, forbidden chambers, and cursed artifacts continue to evoke fascination and fear, challenging perceptions of reality and morality. Visitors, historians, and paranormal researchers alike are drawn into a complex web of experience, reflection, and observation, where every step, every glance, and every shadow holds potential significance. In this way, the castle's legacy endures. It is no longer merely a place of historical record, but a living narrative where the past and present converge, and where the extraordinary intersects with the ordinary. Preservation protects its structure and artifacts, but cannot contain its mysteries or diminish the sense of awe and terror it evokes. Mirrors still refuse to reflect certain faces, shadows continue to move independently, and forbidden chambers retain their disorienting, uncanny atmosphere. The castle remains a sentinel of history, morality, and the unknown, a dark, enigmatic monument that continues to captivate, terrify, and inspire all who dare to enter. Even as the castle stands today, meticulously preserved and carefully studied, its essence remains elusive, resisting complete understanding. Section 14, Reflections of the Past, brings together centuries of mystery, folklore, and human experience, emphasizing the enduring power of the castle's mirrors, shadows, and cursed artifacts. This is a place where history, psychology, and the supernatural intersect, a structure whose presence continues to challenge, terrify, and mesmerize anyone who dares enter. The castle's legacy is not limited to its physical architecture or historical artifacts. Rather, it exists in the cumulative memory of those who have experienced it, observed it, and recorded it. Vanishing reflections, shadowed corridors, and haunted chambers are not isolated incidents. They form a continuum, a tapestry of human perception and supernatural suggestion that spans centuries. The stories of nobles, servants, villagers, and modern investigators converge, creating a shared consciousness of fear, fascination, and reverence that cannot be erased. In every whispered tale and chronicled account, the castle asserts its presence, reminding visitors that its mysteries are not bound by time. Mirrors, of course, remain central to this enduring legacy. They are more than reflective surfaces. They are conduits, arbiters, and sometimes predators. Faces vanish, distortions appear, and shadowed forms emerge, suggesting a consciousness behind the glass. These phenomena transcend simple superstition. Modern studies, historical chronicles, and personal accounts all hint at a deliberate, selective interaction between the mirrors and those who encounter them. Whether through moral judgment, psychological manipulation, or forces beyond comprehension, the mirrors act as both witnesses and participants in the castle's unfolding narrative. The vanished reflections of centuries past remain tied to those of today, suggesting that the castle's memory is long, persistent, and remarkably selective. Shadows, too, carry the weight of history. Unlike ordinary darkness, the castle's shadows appear to operate independently, moving with purpose and occasionally interacting with visitors. Historical accounts describe servants and nobles encountering shadows that mirrored, or sometimes contradicted, their actions. Modern observers continue to report similar phenomena: elongated shapes, flickering forms, and figures appearing where no one stands. The shadows seem to possess a temporal fluidity, echoing events from the past while simultaneously observing the present. They are the living memory of the castle, a visual and psychological repository of vanished faces, transgressions, and secrets that the walls themselves have absorbed. Cursed artifacts, from mirrors to portraits to effigies, further cement the castle's enduring power. Each object carries not only its own story, but fragments of human experience, fear, and morality. Visitors report psychological effects, vanishing reflections, and a profound sense of being watched or judged when near these items. The cumulative effect is a haunting reminder that the castle is not inert. It acts as an agent of continuity, preserving centuries of experience and influence. The artifacts function as extensions of the castle's consciousness, ensuring that its mysteries are not merely historical curiosities, but living phenomena with tangible, often unsettling impact. The castle's psychological influence cannot be understated. Generations of inhabitants and visitors have experienced heightened fear, paranoia, and disorientation, demonstrating the structure's ability to manipulate perception. Mirrors, shadows, and architecture combine to create environments where reality is ambiguous and identity can feel tenuous. The Forbidden Chambers, in particular, remain spaces of intense psychological impact, where visitors confront not only the castle's physical anomalies, but also the deeper truths of their own mind. These experiences link past and present, connecting the fears and moral lessons of historical inhabitants with the reactions of contemporary visitors.
In the sense, the castle apparatus both as a historical artifact and a living psychological experiment, testing perception, morality, and character across centuries. Folklore continues to play a crucial role in sustaining the castle's legacy. Stories passed down through generations reinforce the cautionary nature of the castle, warning of vanished faces, shadowed corridors, and cursed mirrors. Yet folklore also ensures that curiosity persists. Tales of the supernatural, moral judgment, and the sentence of mirrors encourage visitors to engage with the castle, perpetuating the cycle of observation, fear, and fascination. In this way, legend and experience are inseparable, each amplifying the other, each ensuring that the tasteless mysteries remain compelling, accessible, and horrifying. The castle today serves as a bridge between history and imagination, effect and folklore, science and the unexplained. Its preservation allows future generations to encounter the same mirrors, corridors, and artifacts that shape the experiences of nobles, servants, and villagers centuries ago. At the same time, its enduring mysteries resist full documentation or explanation, reminding us that some phenomena cannot be contained by scholarship alone. Visitors confront a reality that is simultaneously historical and supernatural, tangible and psychological a space where the past reaches forward, touching the present in ways both subtle and profound. Ultimately, reflections of the past emphasizes the tasteless role as an enduring enigma. It is a repository of human ambition, vanity, betrayal, and fear, yet it is also a living entity, continuously interacting with those who enter its house. The mirrors, shadows, forbidden chamberers, and cursed artifacts often function as instruments of observation, judgment, and memory, connecting generations across centuries. Every vanished revelation, every shadowed figure, and every whispered legend contributes to a legacy that is at once thriving, mesmerizing, and inexorably compelling. As a castle injures, it challenges us to confront fundamental questions. What is reality? How much of what we perceive is shaped by fear, memory, or consciousness itself? Can a place truly possess agency, influencing the living across time? In facing these questions, we recognize that the castle is not merely a historical structure, but a living narrative, a nexus of psychology, morality, and the paranormal. Its legacy persists not only in stone and glass, but in the collective imagination of all who have walked its house, looked into its mirrors, and glimpsed its shadows. The tasteless mysteries remain unresolved there, yet this very ambiguity ensures its enduring power. It is a place where history and legend converge, where human perception and supernatural possibility intertwine, and where the past continues to reflect into the present. Visitors, historians, and folklorists alike are compelled by its allure, drawn into a cycle of observation, fear, and fascination that spans centuries. The castle, in every sense, is alive in memory, in experience, and in revision a dark monument to the enduring mysteries of human curiosity, morality, and the unknown. In the final revelation, the castle stands not merely as a testament to history, but as a living reminder that some enigmas are timeless. Its mirrors, shadows, and cursed objects persist in shaping human perception, ensuring that the vanishing faces, moral judgments, and psychological terrors that defined its past continue to captivate and haunt the present. To enter its house is to participate in a centurious and continuum of experience, one in which the boundaries between reality, folklore, and the supernatural blur, leaving every visitor forever altered by the dark legacy of the tasteless enduring mysteries.